I believe my mother made the perfect decision. To me, it's truly remarkable. 27 years have passed since the heartbreaking loss of Princess Diana, and now Buckingham Palace has revealed a hidden secret that threatens to rock the entire monarchy at its foundations. While carrying out low-key improvements at Kensington Palace, the workers came across a room that had been sealed shut, left completely undisturbed from the time of Diana's last days there. Within that space rested an elaborately decorated jewelry case bearing an eerie engraving directed at anyone courageous enough to pursue the real facts. DS. Once princess and received the assignment to carefully inventory everything inside, what started out as a straightforward royal responsibility quickly evolved into a deeply unsettling discovery filled with disloyalty, concealment, and real peril. Private correspondence, concealed financial accounts, and Diana's personal admissions all pointed toward a formidable plot she had intended to bring into the open. Yet certain individuals ensured she would never have the opportunity to do so. The more Anne explored, the more insistently one particular question rang through her mind. Who truly caused the silence of the princess the public adored? Please subscribe, give this a like, and pass it along as we trace Anne's transformation from a steadfast member of the royal circle into a determined advocate for justice. The very truth that Diana sacrificed her life to safeguard might at last emerge into the daylight. The surprising legacy. Back in the spring of 2024, teams arrived at the more secluded parts of Kensington Palace to handle renovations. Their original plan involved only basic structural repairs in one of the estate's most historic areas, but events took an entirely different turn. Hidden under thick accumulations of dust and concealed behind a panel of wood that had been firmly sealed, the crew discovered a room long forgotten, compact, hushed, and left exactly as it had been during Princess Diana's final period in residence. It felt like a time capsule preserving recollections. News of the find traveled swiftly to Buckingham Palace, and Princess Anne was the one called upon. Being the highest-ranking active royal, someone who still bore the full burden of obligation and was respected for her careful judgment, made her the obvious person to supervise the detailed examination and listing of what the room contained. Even though Anne had deliberately kept herself apart from the theatrics surrounding royal life for many years, she could not ignore how significant this discovery truly was. As she entered the space, the profound quiet struck her immediately. Fine dust had settled over graceful formal dresses, containers filled with personal notes written by hand, and pictures framed of a woman whose existence had inspired both deep admiration and constant intense examination. Anne's emotions toward her late sister-in-law had always been layered and complex. At first she had viewed Diana as overly sensitive, excessively sentimental, and perhaps too eager to be noticed. Yet gradually, in private settings far removed from public view and photographers, Anne began to recognize the intense loyalty Diana showed toward her boys and the issues close to her heart. On a few rare, quiet occasions that went unspoken, Anne had genuinely admired her. Countless objects filled the room, yet one item in particular drew her attention right away. Tucked away toward the rear of a shelf, and partly covered by a soft silk scarf, rested a beautifully crafted jewelry case. Nothing else in the space resembled it. Fashioned from rich dark rosewood with fine carvings and accented by small pearls and sapphires set into the design, the box still held a subtle gleam despite the dust covering its surface. The artistry displayed exceptional skill, and it carried an atmosphere that felt distinctly personal, close, and meant for privacy. Anne lifted it carefully, her expression showing quiet curiosity. It felt surprisingly substantial in her hands, almost as if its contents went beyond ordinary pieces of jewelry. Wearing gloves, she rotated it gently, examining every intricate detail. Then her gaze caught something, an inscription delicately carved into the underside of the lid, positioned in a way that suggested it was never intended for widespread viewing. For those who dare seek truth, DS. Those initials sent an icy shiver traveling along Anne's back. DS stood for Diana Spencer, using only her birth name, without any title such as Princess of Wales. It felt intensely personal and boldly unapologetic, and scanned the room once more, now seeing it through changed eyes. Had Diana deliberately left behind something far more substantial than simple mementos and clothing? What kind of truth had she been alluding to? Why choose to conceal such an enigmatic statement within an object of such elegance? Holding the case tightly, and understood this was far from an average bequest. It represented a mystery to solve, a deliberate communication, and quite possibly a cautionary signal. Whatever secrets it guarded had been reserved for a person with sufficient courage to see past surface appearances. Perhaps for someone who, regrettably too late, now wished she had posed more direct questions when the chance still existed. The concealed inner space, princess, and found herself seated by herself in the privacy of her own rooms. The jewelry case rested on a piece of soft velvet spread out in front of her. Although its exterior had received a gentle polishing, her attention kept returning to that inscription, reading it over and over. For those who dare seek truth, those exact words clung stubbornly to her thoughts, and had never been inclined toward dramatic gestures. Still, the phrasing stirred something within her sense of responsibility, along with another feeling buried deeper that she wasn't prepared to acknowledge yet. With calm, deliberate movements, she lifted the lid. What lay inside took her breath away. Delicate earrings featuring exceptionally rare Burmese rubies rested there, alongside a bracelet sparkling with sapphires that caught light like distant stars, plus a pendant combining emerald and diamond cut with such precision it appeared to radiate its own soft glow. Yet while Anne carefully inspected each jewel, an unusual detail caught her notice. On the reverse side of every piece, someone had etched minute inscriptions, small symbols, specific dates, and sets of initials that appeared nowhere in any official royal collection record she knew. She reached for a magnifying lens and inspected the marks more thoroughly. Certain ones seemed to indicate geographic coordinates. Others appeared to reference files, possibly case identifiers or specific calendar dates. A particular brooch displayed a sequence resembling an international banking identifier. Her forehead creased with concentration. These items clearly weren't cherished personal souvenirs. They served as subtle clues, carefully placed markers. Shifting her focus back to the case, her fingers explored its carved edges and sections almost automatically, her thoughts following the lines of its expert construction. Then, whether by pure accident or something more guided, her thumb applied pressure to a slightly raised area close to the bottom edge. A faint click sounded, and the lower panel moved just a fraction, and held still, breath suspended, before carefully sliding the panel aside. Revealed beneath was a secondary compartment, narrow yet densely filled. It held a packet of letters written by hand, their paper aged and slightly discolored but still readable, secured together with a faded pale blue ribbon that carried a gentle trace of lavender scent. Underneath those rested a group of shiny photographs. In them, Diana appeared deliberately disguised while meeting people and could not identify. The settings looked equally strange: ordinary cafes, dimly lit underground parking structures, quiet private residences. None matched the widely known public schedule of the Princess of Wales. Nestled below the photos sat a modest silver key. A small tag attached to it read, Zurich Deposit Box 837L, and gazed at it in astonishment. Her pulse grew stronger as she returned to the letters. On the top envelope, Diana's familiar flowing handwriting had addressed it directly. To Anne. Please read if I am gone. The date scribbled in the corner sent a chill through her, just 3 days prior to Diana's fatal accident in Paris. Anne lowered herself into a chair slowly, her hands showing a faint tremor. She opened the first letter. Ink had blurred slightly here and there, suggesting it had been composed under pressure. Her eyes fixed on the very first sentence and remained locked there. If you're reading this, then they succeeded in silencing me. For a brief instant the room seemed to tilt around her. This message carried no mere nostalgia. It contained no theatrical flourish. Instead, it delivered a stark alert from someone who had already crossed beyond life. Anne shut her eyes briefly and drew in a steadying breath. Whatever revelation Diana had managed to uncover now rested entirely in Anne's possession, and clearly certain parties had taken extraordinary measures to ensure it stayed concealed forever. Diana's last admission. Although the letter quivered just a little in Princess Anne's hold, her focus stayed firm and clear. Diana's script covered the page, graceful in form yet marked by pressing haste, the letters leaning sharply forward as though written while racing the clock. And continued reading, her breathing catching at points as the mood moved from warmth to solemn gravity. Diana opened by remembering a formal charity event held in 1995, the evening when suspicion first took root in her mind. A well-regarded organization supporting children, one she had supported with tireless effort, had somehow failed to pass on money designated for international projects. When she discreetly sought clarification, she encountered vague replies, inconsistent financial explanations, and ultimately veiled warnings. The more persistently she pursued clarity, the more profound and troubling the underlying corruption appeared. Turning to the next page, and discovered a detailed financial summary drawn up in Diana's own careful handwriting, precise columns listing figures, transfers between banks, and accounts kept anonymous. Diana's accompanying notes explained that money intended to help victims of landmines, pediatric medical facilities, and shelters for women had instead been redirected into private holdings. Certain accounts linked to influential corporate figures. Others, even more alarming, connected to individuals positioned inside the royal establishment itself. In the letter, Diana's tone turned noticeably colder and more determined. She described clandestine nighttime discussions with reporters specializing in investigations, one based in France, another in Switzerland, who had already detected hints of a broader scheme. She referred to assigned code names, locations used for discreet exchanges, and ongoing monitoring. She had started secretly recording important discussions, keeping those recordings hidden in places known only to her. Certain insiders had approached her privately, providing paperwork and first-hand accounts, all while living in fear for their personal safety, and leaned back, her heart beating forcefully. She had never once pictured Diana as someone capable of organizing an effort on this scale. For so long, she had regarded her sister-in-law as someone driven by feelings rather than logic, kind-hearted certainly, yet prone to impulsive actions. But this displayed careful planning, not rash behavior. Here stood evidence of a woman fully conscious of the threats gathering around her, meticulously recording each development because she understood the danger might soon turn directly toward her. In certain passages, Diana's words grew gentler when she mentioned William and Harry. "I am not afraid to die," she had written, "but I am terrified for them, what kind of legacy they will inherit if this reality remains hidden along with me," and felt an unexpected prickling behind her eyes and blinked it away. She had seriously underestimated Diana. The closing chapter of Diana's life had not revolved solely around controversy and sadness. Instead, those months had centered on a determined effort to expose facts, a frantic campaign aimed at safeguarding her sons against the hidden influences quietly controlling the monarchy from inside. Reaching the letter's concluding page, Anne's fingers halted over one particular sentence that had been deliberately underlined. "If you find this, and understand that I prepared a final safeguard. Everything is secured inside a vault in Switzerland." Her gaze returned to the small key recovered from the concealed section. Suddenly its significance felt far weightier. The revelation Diana had perished while attempting to share had not vanished. It waited still, protected beneath layers of earth and guarded by layers of secrecy. And almost certainly, others besides and were actively searching for it even now. The link to Switzerland. Early morning mist shrouded the private aircraft as it landed smoothly in Zurich. Princess Anne had arranged the journey discreetly, traveling alone without any entourage or official reason given. Only her most trusted protection officers knew her actual whereabouts, and even they had received deliberately inaccurate travel plans. The key Diana had entrusted rested safely inside the interior pocket of Anne's coat, positioned close against her chest like a silent reminder of duty. The banking institution in Switzerland maintained a long tradition of discretion, having served clients who prized confidentiality for generations, and presented both the key and the attached label marked 837L. Although her tone remained composed, her heartbeat echoed loudly in her own ears. After glancing briefly at her identification, the bank employee gave a polite nod, showing no sign of recognition, then guided her past multiple layers of protection, each corridor more stark and quiet than the one before. In a private examination room, the deposit box was set down in front of her, and paused for just a second before lifting the lid. Neatly arranged stacks of paperwork greeted her, detailed financial logs, transaction receipts, records of money movements compiled with precision. Folders in various colors stood organized, accompanied by photographs, all annotated in Diana's distinctive script. Most disturbing of all were the collection of audio cassettes and digital discs arranged carefully at the bottom. Each carried a date along with a brief description. One label read simply, "If I disappear," and placed the initial disc into the playback device provided. The display flickered briefly before Diana appeared on screen, seated inside what looked like an ordinary private apartment. Her face showed no makeup, her expression weary yet completely focused. She spoke clearly and directly. "If you are viewing this recording, it means I have been prevented from speaking further. Still, I need you to understand exactly what I discovered and the reasons I refuse to turn away." And leaned closer as Diana began listing specific individuals. These weren't merely anonymous corporate players or overseas financiers, but rather titled members of high society, people who appeared smiling in media images and organized lavish fundraising events. Diana explained precisely how certain charitable organizations had been transformed into covers for moving large sums of money, channeling funds toward weapons transactions, hidden overseas holdings, and covert activities. She had attempted to inform relevant authorities. A few had paid attention, but others had issued clear warnings to back off. She described growing concerns that someone had interfered with her vehicle's braking system, how she had lost confidence in her assigned protection team, how she resorted to using secondary entrances and taking precautions with her telephone conversations. Tears gathered in her eyes as she spoke of William and Harry. "I have to leave them more than just pleasant stories," she said softly. "They deserve to know the facts," and remained motionless as the footage concluded. A wave of nausea rose within her. The scale exceeded anything she had anticipated. Here existed an extensive global structure entangled with the very organizations intended to serve and defend society. Diana had not suffered from unfounded fears. Her suspicions had been accurate, and the cost had been her life. And turned toward the bank employee, who waited just outside the doorway. His face revealed nothing, yet his quiet statement stole her breath. "You aren't the first person to inquire about this particular box," he said in a low tone. Another individual stopped by roughly 2 weeks earlier. They presented themselves as a relative, and grip tightened firmly around the key. The pursuit had already started, and she no longer held sole possession of these fragments of reality. Watching begins. Princess and came back to London carrying a calm but resolute determination. The revelations from Switzerland had shaken her profoundly. Diana hadn't merely observed, recorded, and begun to reveal. She had become the target of active pursuit, and stored all the materials in a protected, secure vault, located inside a private home, well removed from any official royal residences. Yet what she remained unaware of as her flight arrived at Heathrow was that eyes already followed her closely. The initial indications appeared gradually. Her private mobile telephone, the one reserved exclusively for conversations with family, started producing odd clicking noises and echoes while she spoke. Next, postal deliveries experienced unusual delays. Envelopes arrived already opened or resealed clumsily. Her vehicle, which always received meticulous care, suddenly refused to start while parked inside her guarded garage. Later inspection by mechanics revealed a deliberately cut brake cable, though the official explanation attributed it to animal activity, and recognized nonsense when she heard it. She reached out to a longtime acquaintance, now retired from British Security Services, asking him to inspect both her residence and electronic equipment thoroughly. His examination uncovered monitoring software installed on her phone, along with listening devices concealed within her private workspace. Someone had been eavesdropping. Someone understood that she now possessed Diana's collected proof, and they wanted to learn her next actions. Amid this growing atmosphere of tension, a plain package arrived for, and with no sender information included. Its sole content was a name, Timothy Radcliffe, Diana's one-time personal assistant, and recalled him well, a reserved individual deeply devoted to his work who had quietly withdrawn from visibility following Diana's passing. She located him, living modestly near Bath, and he consented to a nighttime meeting inside a small chapel familiar to only a handful of people. Beneath the gentle glow of candle flames in that sacred space, Timothy's features showed the deep lines carved by prolonged silence. He spoke without preamble. "Your sister-in-law did not act entirely by herself," he told her. "She placed confidence in a small circle of us, people who stood outside the established system. We have remained vigilant, waiting until someone else showed sufficient bravery to continue the effort, and listened in stunned quiet as Timothy explained everything plainly. The formal inquiry into Diana's death had contained numerous serious flaws. Important evidence had been overlooked, key witnesses discouraged or intimidated. Video recordings from Paris surveillance cameras had mysteriously disappeared, and accounts mentioning the white Fiat vehicle present at the location had been brushed aside without proper examination. The intention had never been resolution, he stated, only a discreet conclusion. The realization pressed heavily against his shoulders. Diana had lost her life while pursuing honesty, by choosing to follow in her footsteps, and had now placed herself directly in the line of fire. That same evening, upon returning home, she discovered a solitary envelope pushed beneath her door. The writing appeared unfamiliar, and the note inside remained brief. Cease your inquiries, or share her fate, and study the words, feeling only a slight unsteadiness in her fingers. The intention behind the warning stood obvious, yet those responsible failed to grasp a fundamental truth. Fear had never dictated her choices. Having learned precisely what Diana had perished attempting to expose, stepping away no longer remained possible. The spirit of her sister-in-law no longer murmured quietly from hidden corners. Instead, it thundered powerfully from beyond death, and refused to allow it to be muted once more, revealing the structure. Days blended into nights while Princess withdrew into seclusion, carefully examining Diana's assembled materials as though studying revered ancient writings. The paperwork retrieved from Switzerland, the personal messages from Diana herself, and the understated accounts provided by former associates together formed an image too serious to dismiss. Diana had not wandered into peril by chance. She had exposed a worldwide arrangement built upon royal status, carefully disguised beneath layers of charitable work and humanitarian appearances, and constructed detailed chronological sequences, connected identities, and followed financial pathways. The more thoroughly she investigated, the more sharply the picture emerged. Diana's international efforts, her campaign against landmines, her journeys to conflict areas and displaced persons camps, had unintentionally positioned her at the forefront of something far darker. Beneath the surface of photographed moments and media attention, concealed operators had exploited royal travel as useful diversions while arranging illegal arms transactions and moving questionable funds between countries. The sharpest pain came from the sense of disloyalty. Diana had placed genuine trust in some of these individuals. She had shared laughter with them during formal dinners, spoken positively of them during interviews, and publicly supported them. Nevertheless, certain ones had belonged to the exact apparatus intent on eliminating her. Financial documentation included authorizations linked to people situated at the core of palace operations, and carefully compared banking details, charitable entities, and travel histories. One particular identity appeared repeatedly, a person whose outward reputation had remained flawless throughout, someone and had never once considered capable of involvement, a blood relative. Nausea rose within her, and reached out to Timothy Radcliffe again. Working together, they arranged a meeting with one of Diana's longtime associates from the Red Cross organization. After considerable reluctance, the individual verified Anne's worst suspicions. Diana had stood on the verge of publishing a collaborative investigative piece alongside a journalist just prior to her death. That document would have implicated not only major corporate figures, but also individuals from within the royal circle and government-linked companies. That expose had never reached publication. The journalist involved died mere weeks after Diana in what authorities labeled an accidental overdose. Another matter swiftly closed. Among the very last batch of materials, and located a concealed folder marked Operation Marionette. It contained exchanges between overseas intelligence personnel and a private security company previously contracted to observe and restrict Diana's activities. The document's closing statement included a particularly disturbing line: ensure containment before Paris trip. Risk elevated. Anne's breathing halted momentarily. A period followed. She pursued the trail of clues further until reaching the ultimate item, a low-resolution yet perfectly preserved surveillance photograph never released to the public. It captured the Paris tunnel seconds prior to the collision. The notorious white Fiat appeared clearly, yet positioned behind it stood another vehicle, never identified or acknowledged, its registration tracing back to an entity connected to an associate of royal household personnel. Her fingers shook noticeably. This went beyond theory. This constituted direct evidence. The incident had been deliberately arranged. Those responsible remained not only living but still wielded considerable influence, enjoyed ongoing protection, and continued their surveillance, and stood motionless within the quiet of her workspace, one palm resting gently against the photograph. Diana had been actively pursued, and now the pursuer's trail had grown fresh once more. The moment of emotional collapse. Silence filled the study apart from the soft pops and hisses coming from the fireplace. Princess, and remained seated by herself. Evidence materials surrounded her like scattered pieces of a life previously undervalued. A photograph showing Diana, bright, smiling, unaware of the danger she faced, had been affixed near groupings of paperwork. This time, Anne's eyes remained fixed upon it not from the perspective of an official royal figure or a doubtful witness. Instead, she perceived a woman whose cries for attention had gone unheard. Without warning, one tear traced a path along her cheek, catching her by surprise, and had never been recognized for outward emotional expression. Her existence had centered upon self-control, appropriate separation, and steadfast composure. Yet on this particular evening she gave way. She covered her face with both hands and allowed quiet, even sobs to emerge, for the sister-in-law she had so thoroughly misunderstood. For the young woman who had entered a dangerous arena armed solely with sincerity and firm belief, and recalled how she had once brushed aside Diana's anxieties as mere exaggeration, interpreting her passion as childishness. Now, however, each written message, each recorded statement, every lingering echo demonstrated that Diana had possessed greater awareness, deeper bravery, and more profound loneliness than anyone had realized. "I ought to have noticed," and murmured softly to the empty room. "I ought to have spoken with her directly." Regret settled heavily across her chest like an immovable burden. Diana had attempted to sound the warning, to share the reality openly, yet the establishment itself, along with news outlets, the palace structure, and even impersonally had all looked elsewhere. Society had labeled her as problematic, emotionally volatile, craving spotlight, yet attention had never been her goal. She had sought safety for her children, and turned once more to one of Diana's concluding letters. "They will continue relentlessly until they control every aspect," Diana had stated. "Even William and Harry remain vulnerable to the corruption spreading within these walls. My personal safety no longer concerns me. What frightens me is the people they might become should nobody reveal the facts to them," and pressed the page tightly against her heart. Fresh tears arrived, warm, soundless, purifying. Despite all the splendor, tradition, crowns, obligations, and formalities, this central element had escaped notice. A solitary mother confronting a tempest, using her own presence to shield her children. Diana had never posed any danger. She had functioned as their defender. As Anne rose to compose herself, her telephone vibrated quietly. A protected connection, she answered immediately. "Ma'am," came Timothy Ratcliffe's voice, tight with urgency. "Activity has occurred," and became completely still. "Where exactly?" "At Lambrook, Prince George's school. An intrusion attempt took place on the premises. Security personnel prevented it, yet this cannot be coincidental. We suspect the group has shifted focus toward the younger generation, beginning with Prince William's children. You must contact him immediately." The connection ended abruptly, and continued staring at the device, her heart pounding forcefully inside her chest. The threat had never truly ceased. It had merely assumed a different shape, and presently it extended beyond historical events. The identical forces that had imposed silence upon Diana now advanced toward her sons. This time Anne refused to remain on the sidelines. She would engage directly. The urgent pursuit. Immediately after the conversation concluded, Princess Anne sprang into action. No opportunity existed to notify protection services through standard procedures. Too many connections had already shown signs of compromise. She reached out solely to individuals in whom she placed complete trust. She began with a former MI5 leader who had quietly owed Diana a debt of gratitude long ago. Less than 60 minutes later, a discreet security unit received orders to proceed to Lambrook School where Prince George attended lessons. Simultaneously, another covert group headed toward monitoring Prince Harry's current residence in America. They understood clearly that available time had grown dangerously short. Under cover of night, and departed from Kensington. Her travel path remained concealed, and all communications used encrypted channels. Accompanying her traveled portable storage devices containing original records along with duplicate visual materials, everything Diana had placed her life in jeopardy to assemble. The objective stood straightforward: reveal the entire operation before further harm could occur. Yet, and recognize that those involved would not surrender peacefully. Having remained concealed for so many years, they would defend their position fiercely rather than allow honesty to prevail without significant cost. While MI5 personnel worked to connect overseas financial records with senior government figures and took a step she had never anticipated. She arranged a private meeting inside Clarence House with two prominent royals whose names had appeared explicitly within Diana's concealed documentation. Their faces maintained carefully neutral expressions, polished masks of practiced composure. You possessed knowledge of precisely what she had begun to expose, and stated in an icy tone. And you permitted events to unfold. One shifted slightly in discomfort. These matters involved nuances far exceeding any single individual's understanding. No, and countered sharply, her voice carrying an edge sharper than they had previously encountered. These constituted criminal acts, and your continued silence no longer suffices to shield anyone. She set a thick folder upon the table surface. Should any harm come to William, to Harry, or to their children, every detail becomes public knowledge. Each document, each identity, each financial movement. The quiet that followed felt almost unbearable. Finally, one of the men spoke, keeping his tone subdued. You are creating adversaries impossible to detect. I have already done so, and responded. And yet here I remain. At the same moment, MI5 operatives reported suspicious activity close to Prince William's personal residence. An unmarked delivery vehicle had attempted to circumvent boundary safeguards. Although intercepted successfully, its cargo proved deeply concerning. Architectural diagrams, monitoring photographs, and modified braking components intended for a staff vehicle. This incident represented no ordinary theft. It served as a deliberate communication. From her location at Sandringham, and observed real-time footage showing Prince George being swiftly removed from school property under maximum precaution. Her hands displayed only minimal shaking. The concealed players had now stepped into view. Roughly 60 minutes afterward, authorities reported that a dark SUV transporting Catherine along with George and Charlotte had been deliberately run off a quiet rural lane. The operator survived the incident. The vehicle sustained complete destruction. Fortunately, no life-threatening injuries occurred, yet the intended signal had arrived clearly. This event represented no random mishap. It constituted an initial warning. The subsequent attempt would likely aim for finality. Anne's expression grew resolute as she viewed rescue personnel surrounding the damaged vehicle. Conflict had begun, and she had already declared her allegiance. Diana's ultimate triumph. On the morning following the near assault, Princess, and positioned herself at a lectern inside a protected conference space while international media waited in tense silence. Positioned securely behind her under MI5 supervision stood locked containers, electronic storage units, and crates holding evidentiary items, all originally gathered within Diana's secret collection. No longer could the reality remain concealed. It stood ready for release, and drew in a calm, solid breath. For many years, we presented the public with an account that lacked essential elements, she commenced, speaking quietly yet with unshakable firmness. What we neglected to disclose, what remained deliberately withheld from everyone, was that Diana, Princess of Wales, did not perish merely as an emblem of kindness. She died while actively pursuing justice. The disclosure created immediate powerful reverberations throughout the country. During the days that followed, news sources published identities previously regarded as beyond reach. Senior public officials, major business leaders, and certain lesser members of royalty faced detention or compelled departure from positions. Financial holdings located overseas experienced asset freezes. Previously restricted investigative materials underwent reopening. The intricate network Diana had first identified and then had subsequently illuminated started coming apart. At its center stood a woman once ridiculed for displaying excessive feeling and acting on impulse. Today, however, Diana stood fully exonerated. Her death had carried profound purpose. She had given her life defending honesty and safeguarding her children. In the period that followed, and discreetly established the Diana Truth Foundation, an entity committed to openness within worldwide charitable activities, safeguarding individuals who expose wrongdoing, and supporting serious journalistic inquiry. Its purpose remained straightforward: continue bearing the light Diana had kindled privately. No longer did her memory center upon sorrow alone, it now embodied achievement. One quiet evening within her personal workspace, and once more approached the elaborately decorated jewelry case. Following all the upheaval, it had been carefully stored, documented, and safeguarded, though never completely unpacked. Her fingertips moved gently along the soft interior lining until locating a subtle indentation. Another soft click occurred, and a narrow section rose. Within rested a slender audio cassette contained inside an envelope bearing clear instructions. For William and Harry, only if the world at last listens. Anne's breathing paused momentarily. She held the item briefly before inserting it into an aging playback machine and starting it. Diana's familiar voice gently filled the space, quiet yet completely steady. "My beloved sons, should these words reach you, then I trust you have learned the complete reality, not merely concerning my fate, but regarding your true identities. You are far more than emblems or future rulers. You possess hearts capable of genuinely improving this world. Refuse to live in fear. Instead, embrace bravery. That represents what I attempted throughout my days. That remains what I hope you will continue doing, both for yourselves and for everyone whose voices have gone unheard." Tears gathered in Anne's eyes. Diana's concluding offering extended beyond mere revelation. It embodied enduring love, constant, unbreakable, and ultimately successful. Princess Diana's concluding endeavor never centered upon personal recognition. Its purpose focused upon defending honesty and protecting her sons against an inheritance built upon suppression. Thanks to Princess Anne's persistent commitment to fairness, that reality has finally received acknowledgement. What once remained concealed beneath precious stones and confidentiality now forms an essential component of historical accountability. Diana transcended the role of princess alone. She functioned as an exposer of wrongdoing, a guardian, and a devoted mother who refused to abandon the struggle. Subscribe if you'd like to explore additional hidden narratives that bring forward what official accounts preferred to overlook. Give this a like and share widely to ensure these important perspectives continue reaching others. Each newly revealed fact moves us nearer to a time when suppression no longer prevails. Remain engaged. The subsequent disclosure is already developing quietly within palace walls.